The landowner had recently purchased about 230 acres, and the property was primarily hardwood timber that had been harvested several years in the past. In fact, we saw the stumps of the trees that had been harvested, and it had been high graded, which means when the loggers came in, they removed the highest quality trees, those that brought the most profit at the time, and left the low quality trees. The low quality trees were receiving more sunlight, more water, nutrients, and they grew up and eventually created a closed canopy forest of low quality trees.
Right. Deer make that living from 0 to 3 feet, and you look through there, there's no food whatsoever right now for deer, and no cover. And so we want to get some native species in here.
As the landowner and I talked, I learned his specific goals and objectives were to provide hunting opportunities for members of his family, which included younger hunters and hunters that were, primarily hunting with a firearm. But then he also wanted to be able to bow hunt the property himself. As we toured, I used the Hunt Stand app to make notes of my observations and really took time to explain the details to the landowner of how to improve the native habitat and use the release process to produce high quality food plot forage. So when I started laying out the native habitat on the property, you can tell by the 3D feature on Hunt Stand that much of the native habitat is on the side slopes. And for a firearm hunter, man, that's awesome. They can cover a lot of ground, several hundred yards. But for a bow hunter, it's a little tougher to get on those side slopes and get within bow range of a deer without that wind wanting to swirl. So we need to get up on top of the ridge where the wind is more consistent and start creating or finding bottlenecks to get deer within range of a bow hunter. So when I started looking at this property, you can tell the middle of the property is pretty much one long ridge. In fact, it kind of tapers off to the west and creates what we call an elevator ridge, where it's easy for deer to travel up and down the terrain, going from high to low or low to high elevation. And up on top of the ridge, the previous owner had created a large food plot. Now there was still some flat land to work with, so we really needed to dive in on this site-specific plan and figure out how we were going to get some bottlenecks up on this ridge. When we zoom out on the map and we look at the surrounding properties, we're seeing a lot of high-graded timber and fescue cattle pasture. It's obvious that food is a limited resource in the area. And you're going, man, Daniel, you've got some flat land up on top of that ridge. Let's just create one big food plot. That's that limited resource. Of course you're going to pull deer in. And that might have been an option if the landowner was only firearm hunting and didn't have as many hunters, but he needed more hunting locations and bow hunting locations. So instead, I started designing a series of small food plots and hidey holes, kind of using that large feeding destination plot as our foundation. Now we've created a lot of bottlenecks and hunting locations that a bow hunter can hunt during different wind directions. Our native habitat also comes into play. We're going to use that as a feature to bottleneck deer even more. You'll notice I didn't recommend that the landowner use TSI in between the food plots. And that's going to create these hard edges and hardwood travel corridors as deer sneak around the edge of food plots or as they travel to and from the food plots. It just worked out that that food plot had been created in the middle of the property. And that's great because now these smaller plots and these travel corridors are acting as transition zones. A hunter can slip in the afternoon and hunt and allow deer to travel past them to that destination food plot, and then they can slip down without alerting deer and go back to the cabin or back to the truck. And in the mornings, they can sneak in, climb up the tree or into the blind while the deer are out in that larger plot feeding. and catch them coming back to a favorable bedding area. Hunting transition zones has its benefits. You reduce alerting deer and you gain some minutes on your shooting light. If you were hunting right on that large food plot, deer may not step out until right at dark. But by being several hundred yards back and being in that transition zone, your odds are much higher to have a deer within range during shooting light. This landowner's already chomping at the bit to start implementing the plan. And I gotta tell you, as that native habitat improves and he starts building soil health and getting really healthy, palatable food plot forage, this property is going to be a gem and he's going to enjoy some great hunts. And the design and the habitat improvements work together to meet his goals and objectives to provide hunting opportunities for his family, for firearm hunters, and for him as a bow hunter. If you're starting to lay out some food plots or start on some habitat improvement work, make sure you consider how those improvements and changes are going to affect deer movement and future hunting opportunities. This project is a great example of how hidey-hole food plots paired with some habitat improvement work can create some great bottlenecks in timber country. If you'd like to learn more about hidey-hole food plots and how to create bottlenecks in timber country, we'll be sharing several videos later this spring as we walk through the steps of creating a hidey-hole food plot with hand tools, planting, and managing them as we prepare for fall hunting season.